It really did all start with the death of my mum. So that coincided with the birth of my first child. So the two events led to depression. And so I was medicated for that properly, but I just felt it wasn't enough. So I knew what drugs would make me feel better. So I started to use opiates specifically to just ease the numbness and the pain. So right from the beginning, it was all about dealing with my emotions. Well, I grew up in the most amazing family with very happily married parents. It was a very happy household and a very loving household, and Mum was always there. And I was the only daughter, so we had a particularly close bond, and they approved of my marriage. Everything was going well. I was having my first child. She was extremely excited about that. We actually had that child because we knew Mum was terminally ill. So she was part of our decision to start a family. And then she passed away 3 months after that child was born. And we knew this was going to happen, but it still doesn't prepare you for the aftermath of all that. Well, I had actually moved away from my family home, so I actually lived miles away, and the only way I could contact my mum was just phone calls. I couldn't see my mum every day, and I really wanted to. We were that close. I think that also didn't help my situation, that all my family was down the line and I was up in Auckland with my new life. It wasn't easy to be apart from them because we were a close family. I actually had a lot of anger. It was more anger when Mum passed away because I had this attitude that she didn't have to go that young because she should have got onto it a lot sooner. But, you know, yeah, it doesn't work out that way. So being a nurse and married to a doctor, we actually knew too much, and we knew before the family that it was going to be a terminal illness. Yeah, they were quite blind to it all, really, especially Dad. He truly believed that she was going to get well and she was going to get better. But I remember my husband saying, you know, we need to start a family soon because your mum's not going to be here. So that was a good couple of years before it all ended for Mum. Well, I sort of, you know, left the family all down the line, came back to Auckland and got on with my life because I had a newborn, and the family's attitude was, you know, she's got her husband there that will help her through this. But, you know, that's not always the case. So I had, it actually got to the stage where I was unable to look after my newborn. I was that depressed. I had to have the child looked after by my mother-in-law for a couple of weeks when she was that young because I just was that severely depressed. So I truly believe that it was actually a combination of grief and postnatal depression. And it just slowly got worse and worse. I believe that the medication I was on for the depression just wasn't working. So that's when I took it on myself to seek out the sort of drugs that I knew would just calm me and put me in a happy place. So looking back, I can see how it developed into an addiction to opiates. So the actual addiction progressed really slowly initially, and after 20 years of different types of drugs, I ended up using a drug that did enormous damage to my body medically. That was the sort of last 5 years of my using, and it basically resulted in numerous admissions to hospital, numerous admissions. I was under 2 different clinical teams because of the damage I'd done to my body. It got to the stage that I was so unwell. I had malnutrition, extreme weight loss, a feeding tube, and I was starting to go into renal failure. That was my last admission at hospital. And I still actually have ongoing issues with all that. So that's the consequences I have to put up with. So I actually worked out I had an addiction problem very early on in my using. But I believed that I was intelligent enough and in the know that I could control it.
And you can say, I was a nurse.
I knew that I was, can I say that? Okay. Okay, how do we do that? So I knew very early on in my using that I had an addiction problem. I was a registered nurse and I was educated, and I believed that I could control and manage my using without it being a problem in my life. But that's not how it ended up. I think it had gone past the fact that it was all about grief and the depression, and I'd actually hit another level. I was actually an addiction, actively so, and I knew the difference between the two. I used to detox myself at home numerous times, but I was always back on it, and I always found a reason to go back on it. I could justify going back on it in my head. And looking back now, I can see that that was actually the addiction. So back in 2007, I was encouraged by a doctor and my husband to do the rehab thing at Capri. And I felt like a holiday for 4 weeks, so I felt like getting them off my back. So yeah, I did it. And did the 4 weeks, did what I was supposed to do. And I'd probably said what I was supposed to say, but left and went straight back out and got on it again. Yeah, so my first stint at treatment was just to go and learn how to use it better and control it better, really. But that's not how it rolled, really, in the end. It just took me straight back to where I left off, and worse. I then spent the next 5 years coming and going through Capri, doing a week here or a weekend there. They were constantly trying to help me. So finally, in 2012, I was once again in hospital. I'd been told by the doctors there that if I didn't stop using drugs, I wasn't going to make it. I had lost the marriage. I had no home. And that's when I realised, finally, that I'm either in or I'm out. And finally it dawned on me that I didn't want to be taken out by using drugs and being an active addict. So I finally did what I was supposed to do, and I reached out and I went back to Capri Hospital and started what I believe is my first proper journey into recovery, because I finally wanted to do it for myself and not for everybody else. I was over keeping everybody else happy. I finally wanted my life back for me, and I honestly went into treatment this time and I didn't care about my husband, I didn't really care about the kids, I didn't care that I didn't have a home. I was going to do it and I was going to get on with my life on my own, and I was quite happy with that. So I came back into Capri, and there wasn't many treatment options available to me because they had actually educated me on everything. But the one thing that I had failed to take on board was one of the suggested things, and Tom said to me that I had never embraced the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous, and he truly believed that no one had ever failed him once they'd done the 90 meetings in 90 days. And I truly believed that that's what saved my life. I actually surrendered, got down on my knees, which is something I don't do often, and I took on every word that Tom said. So I began, while I was in treatment, I began doing a meeting a day for 90 days. And I just did what I was told, and I didn't care about my husband. I still didn't care about the kids, and I still didn't care that I had a home to go to. I just was doing what I was being told, one day at a time. You know, you get taught all these different sayings in recovery, and the one that I truly used to hate hearing was one day at a time. But honestly, that was the only way I could do it, and I had to live one day at a time for that first year, at least. And things were starting to get better. You know, I was able to leave 4 weeks of treatment with a month's worth of meetings under my belt. I did have a home to go to. My girlfriend took me on. She gave me a roof over my head and food in my belly and just a loving environment. And it wasn't until I was 4 months well that I was allowed back into the family home. I wasn't sure if I wanted that, but I had to give it a go. I did want my kids back by this stage, but I wasn't sure about the marriage. So I was allowed home after 4 months of being away. And I was still doing a meeting a day. I was still coming into Capri regularly, and I was still working my program, finally. And at 6 months clean, that's when the whole marriage thing changed with my husband and I. That's when we both actually felt that things could be salvaged. And ultimately they have been. We're still together, and we've just celebrated 26 years of marriage. I'm still doing the suggested things because I'm actually too frightened not to. I now realise that I have this disease of addiction to the day I die, and that was something I used to not accept. But I am a recovering drug addict till the day I die. And if I don't do some form of recovery daily, you know, I'm only one drug away from dying, because that's where it took me. It almost took me out. I'm involved with the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. I do service within NA, and I was encouraged right from the word go when I got well to become involved with Capri and become a volunteer. The guy believed that I had to be present at Capri and give back and volunteer, because, you know, he's a great believer in the still suffering addict, and I'm a great believer in that as well, and it's just working for me because I want it to. Today I am 3 years, 2 months, 1 week, clean and serene, and my life is better than it's ever been. So for the person out there who's wanting to get well, I truly believe you can get well, but only if you want to. It doesn't work if you're going to do it for everybody else. It's got to be all about you. And it took me many, many years to realise that. So it's all about you and what you want. You've got to forget about the family. You've got to forget about the marriage. You've got to forget about the job. Because none of that's going to be around if you don't want to get well.